the Kuntris. I'm sorry. Are you on? Yeah, we're going weiter in the Maharal, and essentially the Kuntris Ner Mitzvah has two parts. The first part was a general discussion of the four Malchios, which really wasn't about Chanukkah per se. It was about the four Malchios, of which Yavin was one of them. So Baruch Hashem, we finished that. So now we get to the second part, which is actually about the Chanukkah miracle itself. And you'll remember that the Maharal developed the idea that each of the Malchios, each Golus, has a particular danger that it poses to Klal Yisrael. Bavel was one of persecution and enslavement. Persia was one of genocide. Haman literally wanted to physically kill out the Jewish people. But Yavan is very unique. Yavan is the only one of the Malchios that was a milchama against the Torah itself. Nebuchadnezzar didn't really care if Jews kept the Torah or didn't keep the Torah. And Haman also didn't care. Haman would kill a Jew whether he was from or not from at all. But Yavan was bedafka, a war against the Torah, a war against Kedusha. And the Maharal points out that the reason why the Kayach of Yavan is to be misnaged to Kedusha is precisely because Yavan in some ways is the closest to us. Yavan has the blessing of Chachma. Yavan developed Chachma, philosophy, science, mathematics. Yavan reached the highest level of human Chachma. And what are they lacking? They're lacking the divine wisdom of the Torah. But based on the idea that you hate the competition, Yavan had a hatred. Okay, Yavan had a hatred for. Am I supposed to talk to? Okay, it's an empty room. Okay, Yavan had a hatred for Kedusha, precisely because the Chachma of Torah, which is the Chachmas Elokus, it is the wisdom of God, was misnaged to the Chachma of Bnei Adam. Now, the emes is, there is a way that we could use the Chachma of Yavan even in Avodas Hashem, but Yavan was misnaged. In other words, the point basically was that Yavan represents the Kayach that wanted to elevate human intellect above everything else. And that is why Yavan, of all of the Goluses, was Mesugal to go against Kedusha. And the two sources of Kedusha that Yavan hated was, number one, the Torah, and number two, the Beis HaMikdash, because both of them are sources that bring the Shekhinah into the world. And the Maharal points out that we always find that Torah and Beis HaMikdash are linked. As we say every day in Shemona Esrei, Sheyibaneh Beis HaMikdash b'mheira v'yameinu v'sein chelkeinu b'seirasecha, that there is a shaychus, there's a thematic connection between Torah and Mikdash. Both of them bring God into the world. And Yavan was misnaged both to Torah, which is why Antiochus made gezeros against mitzvahs, and Mikdash, which is why the Yavanim contaminated the Mikdash. Now remember, it's interesting. The Yavan did not destroy the Beis HaMikdash. This is the second Beis HaMikdash. Unlike the Babylonians that destroyed the first Mikdash, and the Romans that destroyed the second Mikdash, Yavan did not destroy the Mikdash, but maybe they did something that's even worse than destroyed the Mikdash. They took possession of the Mikdash, and they desecrated it. They sacrificed pigs to Avodah Zarah. They put up statues in the Mikdash. They were metameh the Heichal. They even made houses of prostitution in the Mikdash. Interestingly enough, it's 3 years day to day. It's interesting, just to give you the secular years here. Yavan, Antiochus, took over and desecrated the Mikdash. It was the 25th of Kislev. That's the day of desecration. In the year 168 of the Common, before the Common Era,— and 3 years to the day the 25th of Kislev, 165 BCE, is when the Maccabim regained the Beis HaMikdash, and that is the Chanukkah story. That is when we found the jar of oil. 3 years, day to day. So it's interesting that although the 25th of Kislev turned out to be the great day of Yeshua, that we regained the Beis HaMikdash, it was actually the day that the Mikdash was contaminated. 3 years before. And that is why the Maharal says the miracle of Chanukkah, which commemorates the miracle over Yevanim. Again, Chanukkah is not about a war for independence. It's not about politics. It's not about, like it's sometimes portrayed, we fought to be free, like July 4th. Chanukkah is about the victory of the Kayach of Torah over the Chachma of Yavan. And that's why the Maharal says that the victory of Chanukkah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us a nes involving neiros in the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, look at how exact it is. The main simcha of Chanukkah is the victory over Yavan. But the Eibishter gave us this nes because, number one, the Torah is called light, as the pasuk says in Mishlei, Ki ner mitzvah v'Torah or. Right, a mitzvah is like a candle. That's the name of the sefer, and the Torah is or. So the menorah represents the light of Torah, and of course it's in the Beis Hamikdash. So if Yavan was trying to destroy our relationship to Torah and our relationship to the Beis Hamikdash, so what does HaKadosh Baruch Hu give us as a nes? A nes involving the Beis HaMikdash and the Kayach of Torah that is compared to Torah or. That's why the mitzvah is, but I'm sorry, not the mitzvah, that's why the nes are neiros connected to Mikdash, because those were the two enemies that Yavan wanted to destroy. Torah, which is symbolized by the light of the menorah, and Mikdash, the holiness of the Beis HaMikdash that Yavan wanted to fight. And now he adds another component. And this is also why the miracle is 8 days. Now there's Mikdash, Neiros, and 8, because we find that the Torah, we'll see why, but let's say the fact first, the Torah is connected to the number 8. I'll explain why in a minute, but first just to show how it is connected to number 8. So the Maharal brings a number of rayas that Torah is connected to the number 8. In Tehillim Kuf Yud Tes, this is the longest chapter of Tehillim. And how is it written? Ashrei Tamimei Derech. So it's written 8 psukim for every letter of the Aleph base. So it's 22 times 8. And if you look at all of the psukim, it is all about a praise for the Torah. Ashrei Tamimei Derech is about the Torah.
He brings that fairy tale, the Maharal.
Huh?
The Maharal brings that fairy tale.
Oh, yeah. Maharal says that the Torah is connected to 8, as we see in Tehillim Kuf Yud Tes, for example. Just to give you one example of many, the famous pasuk, the famous Karlbach Nigun, Lule Seirascha Shashuya Yazavadi Biyani, without your Torah, that is my delight in life, I would be destroyed in my poverty. So that's in Ashrei Tamimei Derech, right? All of the psukim about Ma Ahavti Torasecha, Kol Hayayim Hisichasi, how much I love your Torah. The whole day it is my conversation. Kuf Yud Tes. So the truth is, every pasuk of Kuf Yud Tes is about the Torah. So you see, that's raya number 1, that the Torah is connected to 8. I'll explain why. Raya number 2 is another kapitel of Tehillim that we say every Shabbos. Hashemayim misaprim kavod kel. Right, the heavens declares the glory of God. So if you look, there are 7 psukim, and then the 8th pasuk begins, Torah Hashem Tamima Mishivas Nafesh. The Torah of Hashem is perfect. It restores the soul. So there you see what? It's connected to 8. Right? Because Torah Hashem Tamima is the 8th pasuk. in that kapitel of Tehillim. Then, 1 second. Then he brings a third raya, which is interesting, and that is Sfiras HaOmer. That when do we celebrate Matan Torah? After we count 7 weeks. So we're entering the 8th week, right? We finish 7 weeks. Then we have Kabbalah HaTorah, which is connected to the number 8. And therefore the Maharal says, I didn't yet explain why Torah is connected to 8, you'll see in a moment, but the Maharal is masber that is why, since the Yevanim were waging war against the Torah, not against the Jews, against the Torah, Mimela, the Nes, will be connected to the number 8, which is the Mailas HaTorah. The Mailas HaTorah. So it's in 2 different ways. One is the light of the menorah, where Torah is Ohr, and the other is the 8 days of the miracle, which is also connected to Torah. So there are 2 aspects of Torah here, light and the number 8. Now, the reason why Torah is connected to the number 8 is, the Maharal says, that 8 always represents something that is lamayla min hateva. It is above the order of nature. Because the order of nature, the cycle of creation, is 7 days, and then it repeats itself, right? So even though the 7th day is Shabbos, which is holy, but still, Shabbos is part of the creation cycle. So we go 1 to 7, and then we start over again, 1 to 7. So Teva, the Olam HaTeva, is Mugdar as 7, and that which is greater than Teva is called 8, and therefore the Torah comes from the highest levels of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's Mitzias. The Torah is above all Teva, and therefore the Torah is Mekushar to the number 8. Maharal says as well that the reason why Bris Milah is on the 8th day, is because Hashem's covenant, Hashem's relationship with Am Yisrael is Lamayla Min HaTeva, which is an amazing thing, really. There was a British historian, a famous British historian, not Jewish, even a little anti-Semitic maybe, Arnold Toynbee, who wrote a huge work, 10-volume historical work, analyzing all of the ancient civilizations, Babylonians, Sumerians, Egyptians, up to the Greeks and the Romans there. And he was able to find patterns of rise and fall, Yerida, V'aliyah, and he actually felt he identified, b'diuk, what makes civilizations flourish and what makes civilizations fail. And the only civilization, ancient civilization, that didn't meet his pattern were the Jewish people, because based on his cheshbainis, there ought not to have been a Jewish people. I always say that maybe that's what made him anti-Semitic, because the guy writes 10,000 pages, and this is the one slug up, the one thing that I would get mad too, right? So maybe we can't blame him. But Am Yisrael didn't fit, meaning the basic idea was it didn't make sense. Looking at history, you get conquered, you get exiled. I mean, think about this. Nations do get extinct. I mean, there are no Romans around. There are no Romans around. Italians are not Romans. There are no Romans. There are no Babylonians. Like, there are no ancient Greeks. So civilizations disappear. So how come we're around? I mean, all of these nations that tried to kill us, and they were so powerful, and they are gone. So Toynbee basically said that he called the Jews a fossil people. They're like, if you believe in dinosaurs, it's like, you go in and you find a dinosaur, but it should have been dead, so many years ago. So people debated Toynbee, how can you say that? But the emes like is, Toynbee is actually correct in the sense that Toynbee makes the argument, under the laws of history, there ought not to be a Jewish people. My answer to that is, Ein Hachinami. The Jewish people's existence is Lamaila Minat Teva. That's exactly right. So Toynbee's right. Toynbee analyzes Teva. He analyzes the way history works. And based on his analysis of Teva, there ought not to be Jews in the world. That's mamish what Maharal is saying. The bris, which Hashem made with Abraham, is the bris of the 8th day, which is above nature. Meaning in Svara, we ought not to be. There's no logic why we'd be here. Nations that were much more powerful than us. The Romans. There are no Romans. People don't realize this. There's a city of Rome, and there's a country of Italy, but the ethnic Romans do not exist in the world. Now, I don't know if you did DNA testing, you could probably find, 1/100th of somebody is this and that, but there is no identifiable group called the Romans. There is no identifiable group called the Assyrians. There is no identifiable group called the Babylonians. Gone. Because B'Teva, civilizations come and go. L'mayla min ha'teva, right? So the Maharal was masber. So you see, very, very nice. The Maharal was masber why the miracle of Chanukkah was with Neiros, why it was in the Beis HaMikdash, and why it was 8 days. Because Yavan was an enemy against Torah and against Mikdash. The light of the menorah represents Torah. The 8 days represent Torah, l'mayla min ha'teva. And Mikdash was the second thing that the Yavanim were against, and that's why the miracle of B'davka happens in the Beis HaMikdash. Okay, Now then, after this, the Maharal then brings two passages from the Gemara in Maseches Shabbos about Chanukah. So really, this is really just the Gemara. The first passage of Chanukah, which is interesting, and I see that the editor here has a kasha. Why does the Maharal bring this Gemara? Because he doesn't say anything about this Gemara. He says something about the next Gemara, but since the Maharal brings the Gemara, I'll mention it. That this is the mitzvah that you're supposed to light the menorah at the entrance of your house, right? As many people do, most people do in Yerushalayim. In this country, you light it by the doorway. Of course, without getting into detailed halachas, what does that mean in an apartment building? Is this the door of the apartment? Is it the door of the ground floor? Okay, but whatever it is, it's by the doorway. If you live in a upper story and you don't have your own doorway, meaning you have to go through someone else's house, so you don't have your own door. So in such a situation, you light it by a window that faces Rosh Hashanah, and then it mentions that if it's a sakana, meaning if the goyim are going to persecute you, so you light it in your table, and that's going to be enough. Now, as you know, without getting into the halachos in too much detail, the minhag in chutz la'aretz in most places is that people light it in their house, and it's really a kasha. Why is that so? Are we not mechuyev to light it al Pesach Beisai? So some learn that once it was a sakana to light it outside, the Chachamim permanently changed the mitzvah to move it inside. So even when there's no sakana, you light inside. In other words, when it says shasa sakana, you light inside, they changed it from that time. Others say, aliba diyames, it should always be outside by the Pesach. And when there's a sakana, you put it inside. When there's no sakana, you do it outside. So it's not really a chiluk between Eretz Yisrael and Chutz La'aretz. It's a machlokas generally, but for some reason, the hachra in Eretz Yisrael was to do it outside. But some people do it inside even here. And in Chutz La'aretz, it's just reversed. The hachra is to do it inside, but some people do it outside in Chutz La'aretz too. Okay. Then Rava says that since you're not allowed to get benefit from the Ner Chanukah, you have to have an extra candle that we call the Shamesh to be able to get benefit. Now, Miyikar Adin, of course, if you have electric lights, you actually don't need a Shamesh. A Shamesh is only there to be the light that you're permitted to read or cook by, whatever it would be. But our minhag is that we have this extra candle even if there are electric lights, etc. All right, so that's passage number 1, which the Maharal does not even comment on. Okay. Passage number 2, the Maharal will be marichan, and that is the Gemara gives 3 levels for how you observe the mitzvah of Chanukkah. There are 3 levels. We'll call it basic. Sounds like kashrus. There is mahadrin, and there's mahadrin min hamahadrin. So the basic is very, very surprising. The basic mitzvah of lighting Chanukkah candles is ner ishu beisai. You know what that means? Let's assume a person has a family of 10 people, including himself. According to the strict halacha, if he only lit 1 candle every night, not counting the shamish, 1 candle night 1, 1 candle night 2, 1 candle even night 8, 1 ner potters the whole bias. And you're yotze with 1 ner covering the whole bias. That is the basic chiyuv. 1 candle a night covers everybody. Then there's a level that is called mahadrin. If you want to do the mitzvah in a more beautiful way, and this is still not what we do, you have 1 candle for every member of your family. So that would mean, not counting the shamish, night 1, you light 10 candles. Night 8, you light 10 candles. Meaning 1 ner for every member of the family. Now that's not what we do either. Then there's the highest of the highest level. Mahadrin min hamahadrin. So now we have a machlokas, Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, where Beis Shammai says, now there's both of them are going to say you go with the days, minyan hayamim. Beis Shammai says, Mosef v'holech, Poches v'holech, you start with 8 and you go down. Beis Shammai starts with 8 and goes down. Beis Hillel starts with 1 and goes up. Now, everybody, and of course, as is always the case, 99.9% of the time, machlokas, Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai, we paskin like Beis Hillel. But so we go up. We start with 1, we go up. But keep in mind, this is mahadrin min mahadrin. So, sometimes a person says, I'm not so firm, I just want to be yotze. When it comes to Ner Chanukah, I never heard somebody say, I'm only going to light 1 candle. Even people who don't keep Shabbos, right? Chanukah is a very popular holiday. People need to know. Don't put yourself down. You are a mahadrin min a mahadrin. Now, there is a machlokas. This is machlokas Ashkenazim and Sfardim, machlokas Mechaber and Ramah. If you're doing the highest level, do you also do the middle level? In other words, the middle level was you have a ner for each member of your family. The higher level is an extra ner for every day. Sfardim paskins, Shulchan Aruch paskins, that if you're doing the highest level of a ner for every day, you don't have every member light their own menorah. Meaning, if you have a family of 10, according to the Mechaber, only 1 menorah is lit. Why? Because if the whole point of the highest level is to clearly indicate the days, if you have too many menorahs in the window, you see 50 candles, you don't really know the number of days. So the halacha for Sfardim actually is that only the Baal Habayis lights 1 menorah for everybody in the family. In other words, if you're doing the highest, you don't do the middle of Ner L'chol Echad V'Echad.
But then on day 1 or day 2,
Yeah.
you would only have 1 or 2 candles, even though you might have 7 family members.
That's correct. According to Sfardim, that's exactly right. Exactly right. Only, that's interesting. But since you're doing it as part of the progress of days, if you're doing days, you don't do family members. That's what Sfardim say. The Ramah is cholek. The Ramah is the minhag Ashkenaz, and that is you combine both. You light according to the days, and each member of the family has their own menorah. Now, even that is a machlokes. Each member of the family. What do we mean exactly? Let's take husband and wife, right? So let's say husband and wife. So does that mean, according to Ashkenazim, husband and wife have separate menorahs? Some actually say yes. Some say yes, but ruba deruba, and that we paskin ishtay kegufay. So even like Ashkenazim, most of the time. Now again, if the wife is by herself, she has to light. But if husband and wife are together, husband lights, and that's enough. So that's one thing. Now, what about daughters? So that's also a machlokas. Some say daughters should have their own menorahs, just like sons. Daughters and sons should have their own menorahs. Others say that women don't light separately because since originally lighting was outside and that was not so tznius for a girl to go outside, so even if you're lighting inside, the chiyah was never put on women. So I'm not machriya here. Whatever your minhag is, you have what to be samech on. But what is important is to be aware of the machlokes, the mechaber and the ramah, where according to the mechaber, only the balabayas lights one menorah, and that covers everybody in the household. According to the ramah, everybody, with a shaila for wife and daughters, shaila, but all the other males in the house have their own menorah. The question is, at what age do you start it? 6 months old, whatever it is. Okay, at least when the kid is able to light on his own, even if he needs a parent's supervision and the like. Okay, in fact, Rav Ovadia is so strict that he says that bachrim, yeshiva bachrim, who are supported by their parents, even if they're not home, they are not allowed to light. Let's say yeshiva boy here, they are not allowed to light their own menorah because they are yotzei with the menorah that their parent lights. And as he actually holds, it's a bracha levatala for a ben yeshiva in the yeshiva to light his own menorah because Sfardim say you're yotzei with the hadlaka of the balabayas. As opposed to the Ramah, of course you can light on your own because that's mahadrin min mahadrin. Meaning even if you are yotzei with your father's hadlaka, mahadrin min mahadrin says you should light your own. Yeah.
The Rebbe uses the word menorah. In my neighborhood, which is Bayit Began, a number of people will have a box outside
Yes.
and have the number of cups for the number of days.
Yes,
no
yeah.
kli other than the box.
No, that's 100% correct. You don't need a menorah or what's called a Chanukkah. You're correct. You can have cups, little glasses, lay down. That's perfectly fine.
For Schlesinger,
Yeah.
for Yeshiva, but local Yeshiva,
Yeah.
lights the number of cups for the number of days. But as the Rebbe said, there's a light out there, so he doesn't have a shot.
Oh, he doesn't have a shamish. Okay. That's a little bit of a chiddush because most people have a shamish. But again, meikar hadin, if there's light, I mean, the shamish is not part of the Chanukkah mitzvah. The shamish is just there to be sure that you're not going to use the Chanukkah candles for personal use. So if you have electric light, that's going to be good enough. In fact, that's why I tell people with an oil menorah, you don't really use the shamish, right? So when you make the bracha, you should not light the shamish first and then light the other candles. You should light the shamish last from the wax candle, whatever you're doing. Because if you light the shamish first, that's a hefsek between the bracha and the mitzvah. So the shamish, theoretically, you could actually light the shamish before the bracha, but the minhag is not to do that. But your two choices are, I light the shamish before the bracha, which is not the best thing, or I light the shamish after I lit all the other candles in an oil menorah and the like. Okay. So the Gemara then goes on and says, in the Machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, the Gemara gives two different explanations for the Machlokes. The first explanation the Gemara gives, and the Maharal is maz for each of these things, is that according to Beis Shammai goes down, right? First night 8, you go down. So according to Beis Shammai, you look at the days that are coming, meaning on the first day of Chanukkah, I have 8 days coming up. The second day, there's 7 days. I look at the Yamim HaNichnasim that are coming in. According to Beis Hillel, I look at the days that have passed. Now, that's not really an explanation. So the Maharal explains very, very nicely that Beis Shammai when Beis Shammai looks at a miracle, and you're giving thanks to Hashem for a miracle, so you look at the power that God brought into the world to make that miracle. So the way it works is this. On day one, Hashem put into that oil a power to burn for 8 days. So you're looking at the koach. So the koach of 8 was in day one. By the second day, the koach was only 7. So Beis Shammai is looking at the koach that Hashem put in, and that koach is going to diminish. Because day one, we didn't know it at the time. It's in retrospect. But day one, Hashem put in 8 days of koach. Beis Hillel looks at the miracle in terms of the human perception of the miracle. I perceived on day one only 1 day of burning. Right? So are you looking at the koach, or are you looking at the perception? And by the way, Maharal raises the famous question. This is known as the Beis Yosef's question. The Beis Yosef brings it, although he was not the first either. And that's one of the most famous questions, and that is, if they found enough oil to burn for 8 days, for 1 day, and the miracle was it burned for 8 days till they got new oil, so why is it a miracle for 8 days? It's only a miracle for 7 days. This is known as the Beis Yosef's kasha, and there are literally hundreds of answers. I can tell you, not that I know the answers, but I know there are 500 answers to this question, because I have a sefer that has 500 answers to this question, and I'm told, I don't have it, there's another sefer, it's inflation, that has 1,000 answers. Although if you look at some of these answers, you say, I really think they're cheating. I mean, sometimes they make such a tiny difference between one answer and the other that I don't think it has a din of 2 terutzim. All right, but be the way. But the Maharal gives a very, very simple answer. The Maharal says like this. Some people give a teretz. The Beis Yosef gives a teretz that there is even a miracle on the first day, because since they knew they would need the oil for 8 days, they only poured in 1/8 of the oil, and yet it burnt the whole night. You see, in other words, they have enough oil for one night, because the menorah burns at night. But they didn't want to pour all of the oil in, because they figured they don't know if they'd have for the next day. So they only poured 1/8 of the pach in the menorah each day, and the miracle was that 1/8 burnt. Beis Yosef actually gives such an answer. Maharal says that answer is 100% shelo k'halacha, because you have a chiyuv. We have a chiyuv to light the menorah with oil that will burn the whole night. That's our chiyuv. If we think we're not going to have it tomorrow, that's not our business. We're not allowed l'chatchila to put in less oil than you need. So it's a davar pashut. They vadai poured in all of the oil. And if it got burnt up by the next morning, so be it. But we got to do our mitzvah. So the Maharal says they poured all the oil in the first night. But the chiddush is, in the morning, only 1/8 of the oil was consumed. It became like a slow burning oil. So even on the first day, we saw a miracle, because it burnt the whole night, and only 1/8 of the oil was consumed. You see? And that happened every night. We relit it actually we didn't light it, we lighted it in the late afternoon, but to burn over the night. So every late afternoon, we lit the menorah, and the next morning, only 1/8 of the quantity was consumed, and that's the Maharal's teretz to the Beis Yosef's kasha, meaning not like the Beis Yosef that we only poured in 1/8, we poured in everything, but there was an ace that only 1/8 got consumed.
So at the end of the first day, it would have to be extinguished so it could be relit?
Yes, that's something else people don't recognize. There is a mitzvah to light the menorah every day. People get the impression that the Hanukkah candle burnt for 8 days straight. That's not emes. Every single afternoon, they had to put it out and relight it. Mm-hmm. Now, in a normal case, they would add oil. Here, there was no oil to add, so they relit with the existing oil, but it was lit every night. And by the way, even before the Hanukkah story, there was one of the candles of the menorah that's called the Ner Tamid. Mm-hmm. One, not all 7, that didn't go out, but that too was put out every day. The Ner Tamid was put out every day because it had to be lit every day, but it never went out by itself. It burnt for 24 hours till you had to relight it again.
Wicks each time?
Yes. They had to put in new wicks. Normally it's new wicks and new oil. Here it was new wicks and old oil because you didn't have any new oil for a while. But yeah, every single day new wicks had to be put in.
Was the Ner Tamid then probably a new wick each?
That's correct. The Ner Tamid had a new wick as well. So it's not like people think. People think it just burned continuously. That's not emes. And even the Hanukkah miracle did not burn continuously. It had to be, a new wick had to be put in, and a new hadlaka had to be made every time. Okay. Now, so this is the first explanation of the machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. One is looking at the koach Hashem put into the oil, and the other is looking at our realization of the miracle, which every day we have a greater realization. Now, then there's a second explanation the Gemara gives, and for Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. One is that Beis Shammai compares the Hanukkah candles to the parim, the bulls that are brought on Sukkot. Now on Sukkot, in the Musaf offering, we have a very unusual thing. We start off on day 1 with 13 bulls, and we go down, 13, 12, 11, until the 7th day of Sukkot. Shmini Atzeres is a separate Yom Tov, we don't count that. And those parim, you'll recall, add up to the number 70, and they represent korbanos against the 70 nations of the world to diminish their power, etc. So Beis Shammai says the same way that the parim of Sukkot go down, so Neiros of Chanukah go down. Now that's a bit enigmatic because what's the shaychus between the Parei HaChag and the Neiros of Chanukah? So the Sfas Emes says that just like the Parei HaChag, Maharal is not masber so much here, but the Sfas Emes says, just like the Parei HaChag represents evil that gets progressively weaker as you approach Mashiach, so Beis Shammai looks at the Neiros of Chanukah as a fire that burns away evil. And the hope would be evil gets lessened with the passage of time, right? So it's as if you have 8 bad midos I got to get rid of. After day 1, I only have 7 left, meaning if you're looking at Eish as that which burns away Ra, the hope would be there'd be less to burn away with the passage of time. Beis Hillel, on the other hand, says, Malin B'Kodesh. In Kedusha, you always want to go up. So we don't want to start with 8 and go down. We want to start with 1 and we go up. Okay, so we have 2 different reasons. One is Yamim HaNichnasim versus Yamim HaYaitzin. The other is Parei HaChag versus Malin B'Kodesh V'Ein Moridin. Be it as it may, obviously, in a machlokes Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, we paskin like Beis Hillel, and that is the din of Mahadrin min ha-Mahadrin. 1 second. One second here. Okay. So now the Maharal then brings a third passage in the Gemara. Again, it's in B'mem Adlikin is the sugya of Chanukah. That's 2 or 3 blat on there. And this is the story of Chanukah, that the Yevanim were Metame the Heichal, And when the Chashmonaim entered, they purified the Beis HaMikdash, and they found the Pach HaShemen, and there was only enough for one day, and a great miracle happened that it burnt for 8 days. So now the Maharal, all right, the Beis Yosef's kasha, the Maharal already asked, and he gave an answer. But now he asks another kasha, and this is also a very, very good kasha, and that is, it seems from the Gemara that the reason why we have a holiday of Chanukkah is to celebrate the miracle of the oil, which was a great miracle. But he says that's very schwer. We don't stamazai make holidays because of miracles. No, we don't say, oh, this miracle happened, let's make a holiday. We make a holiday, we make a Yom Tov when Klal Yisrael was saved from sakanas. So the Maharal's Chiddush is the following Chiddush. Maharal's Chiddush is, the miracle of the Pach HaShemen is not why we celebrate Chanukah. We celebrate Chanukah because of the victory over Yavan, not because it's political victory, but the victory that enables us to keep the Torah. Just Hashem gave us the miracle, as we said before, of the Neiros and the Beis HaMikdash, because that's connected the Kayach of Torah and Mikdash. But the miracle is the Nitzachon of Milchama. That's why it's a well-known question. In the Al HaNisim prayer, there is actually no mention of a miracle of Pach HaShemen. There's no mention. It's all about Masarta Giborim Biyad Chaloshim. You delivered the strong into the hands of the weak. Rabim Biyad Ma'atim, the many, into the hands of the, right? And even though it does say at the end that we were able to enter the Mikdash and light candles, but that's not the miracle. That just means we entered the Mikdash and we did the Mitzvah Menorah. There's no reference to a miracle there. Which means from the Al HaNisim, it's a Davar Barer that Chanukah was a celebration of a victory over Yavan, coupled with a rededication of the Beis HaMikdash, Chanukah. And the miracle of the Pach HaShemen is just a miracle that Hashem shows us what this battle was about. It was about the light of Torah, the holiness of the Mikdash. Okay, so we don't celebrate Chanukah because of the Neiros. The Neiros make us think what was at stake in the war of Yavan. And then he gives another answer that says that, and again, this answer, both answers, this answer also says, Chanukah is the Nitzachon over Yavan. Very important. It's the Nitzachon over Yavan. Elamai, whenever we achieve a victory, there's always a sakana that we will attribute the victory to our own ability, our own military ability. Kochi v'yotzem yadi. So after our victory, Hashem gave us a supernatural miracle that cannot be explained by any natural means. So we should remember that even the military victory came from Hashem. So again, the holiday is the victory over Yavan and the rededication of the Beis HaMikdash. But the Nes is either to tell us that this was about Torah and Mikdash, that was at stake, not politics, or to remind us that supernaturally it was Hashem that gave us the victory, and we shouldn't make the mistake of Kochi v'yotzem yadi. Okay? So those are the Maharal's two terutzim on that. Now, he then goes on, again, there's so many interesting points. He then goes on and says, and he uses gematrias. It's interesting. Maharal uses gematrias that most later Sfarim do not use so much. He says, Yavan has a special negative spiritual kayach to be metame kedusha. They didn't destroy the temple, but they could desecrate. And he says the gematria of Yavan is what? Yavan is 55. that right? No, I'm sorry, 65. 65. Yavan is 16, and I'm sorry, 66. 66. Yavan is 66. Heichal, which is based on Mikdash, is 15, and 20 is 35, is 65. So Yavan is 66. Heichal is 65. Min HaShamayim, so to speak, Yavan is given a koach to be misgaber over the Heichal. In the name itself is merumas that Yavan has a koach to be misgaber over the Heichal. But there was part of the Heichal that even Yavan didn't have a koach over, and that is the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Yavan did not enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And who enters the Kodesh HaKadoshim? Only the Kohen Gadol. So the reason why there was a Pach Shemen that remained pure, and Yavan couldn't get to that Pach Shemen, was because it was sealed with the seal of the Kohen Gadol. And the Kohen Gadol has the spiritual kayach of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And Yavan had no shalita over the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Huh?
If they got into the whole Beis Hamikdash, how did they not get in there?
Whatever it would be, they were not able to penetrate there. They were not able to penetrate
But the
there.
Babylonians and the Romans were.
Yeah, but that's because they destroyed. The difference was they destroyed it. Meaning, when there's no mikdash, there's no mikdash. But Yavan is desecrating an existing mikdash,
Right.
and therefore they had no kayach over a Kodesh HaKadoshim. When you destroy it to the Kodesh HaKadoshim,
So is that a riot that's like the only holy place in the Beis Hamikdash? Because if they were able to do everything
it's not the only holy place, but it's the holiest place. And Yavan had no shalita. Yavan is 66, so it's shaylite on the Heichal, that is 65, but the Kodesh HaKadoshim is a higher level, and the Maharal says in the word Heichal, which is Heichal is 65, right? There's a hidden yud. How do you spell Heichal? You spell Heichal, Hey Yud Chaf Lamed. That's Heichal. But the truth is, in the vowel Tseirei, an A has a Yud sound in it. Right? Hey. So the Maharal says that actually means in the word Heichal, there is both a Yud that's Megula, a Yud that is revealed, and a Yud that is Mechusa, a Yud that is hidden. And the hidden Yud is the Kayach of the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And Yavan could defeat the revealed Heichal, but Yavan could not defeat the concealed Heichal. Only the Kohen Gadol could do that, who's Nichnas in the Kodesh HaKadoshim, and that is the significance of the oil being sealed with the Chaisamai of the Kohen Gadol. And then he points out the gematria of Kohen is 75. So, and that's Heichal with the Yud. Right? Heichal with the Yud is 75. The Kayach of Kahuna, Lis Kahuna Gedayla, could be Miskaber, could come even in connection with the Kodesh HaKadoshim. Again, it's interesting. This type of gematria, you don't find. I mean, Hasidic Sfarim are full of gematrias. Maybe that's why the Maharal is treated as an honorary Chassid. He was before the Baal Shem Tov. But the Maharal was the great grandfather of the Baal Tanya. The Alter Rebbe was a direct descendant of the Maharal, and for many, many years, the Maharal now. I mean, not a lot of people don't learn it, but at least everybody wants to learn Maharal. Maharal is very, very makubal in the Litvish yeshivas as a very Yesaidistic Sfarim, Maharal. But the truth is, for hundreds of years, Maharal was almost forgotten. The books were not learnt at all, except among Hasidim. Hasidim preserved the Maharal. 200 years ago, Maharal was learnt only by Hasidim, basically. So who brought Maharal back into the modern world? So really, there are two people who cannot get credit for rediscovering Maharal. Rav Hutner in America, and Rav Dessler in Europe, England, and Eretz Israel. They brought back Maharal to become the Sefer Yesod.
Why was he hidden? Why didn't he study this world?
It's hard to know. People didn't understand his philosophy. There are references to Kabbalah. It also wasn't printed. It was not reprinted. That's a catch-22. Does it not get reprinted because it's not popular, or it's not popular because it's not reprinted? Different in Yonim and the like. Okay. So this is the Maharal's cheshbon of why the Pach Shemen was munach b'chaisamai shel Kohen Gadol. And once again, the Maharal points out the Kohen Gadol is also connected to the number 8. The Kohen Gadol can enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim because the Kohen Gadol is Lamayla Min HaTeva, because the Kohen Gadol wears 8 garments. Now, my little kasha on that is that even though he does wear 8 garments, but when he enters the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he doesn't wear 8 garments. I mean, the 8 garments are the big day Zahav that he wears outside. In the Kodesh HaKadoshim, he only wears 4 garments. But okay. But he says the Koyach of 8 is what gives him rishus to enter the Kodesh HaKadoshim. And there's also a medrash that says that Aaron entered the Kodesh HaKadoshim in the merit of Bris Milah, B'zais Yavai Aaron Ala Kodesh, and it says Zais Habris says, and Memela again the shaychus of being Lamayla Min HaTeva. Okay. Now the final point he makes here, it's not the end of the book, but it's come out the end of the section, is that there's also a significance. So we talked about 8, we talked about Neiros, we talked about Heichal, we talked about sealed with the Chaisameh Shel Kohen Gadol, right? All of these things come together. He says there's something very significant about the 25th of Kislev as a date. And he says that we know that there are 4 tekufas, really there are 4 seasons, but there are 4 tekufas in the year, because the way it works is that, let's say, for example, we have what are called solstices in English and equinoxes, meaning to say there are 2 days a year, one in the spring and one in the fall, where the days and nights are exactly 12 hours. Sunrise, sunset, 12 hours. Sunset, sunrise, 12 hours. That's called equinox. There is an equinox in the fall, and there's an equinox in the spring. And then, after the spring equinox, the days get longer and longer and longer and longer, till you hit the middle of the summer, which is the longest day and the shorter night. And then the nights begin to get longer and longer and longer, till in the fall they're equal. And then what happens is the night gets longer and longer and longer, till you have the longest night, which is in the winter. Right? There's a day in the winter called the winter solstice. That is the longest night of the year. Paradoxically, it is precisely after the longest night of the year that the nights begin to get shorter. It's still more night than day, but I mean, obviously that's so, right? Once you're past the longest night, the night is getting shorter, even though it's still more night than day. So Maharal points out, it doesn't quite fit the secular calendar, but at least according to the Jewish calendar, that the 25th of Kislev is right after the longest night of the year. And therefore, it is when the light begins to be miskaber over the chayshach. It's still mainly chayshach, but imperceptibly, the light is beginning to shine. And that's a very important lesson that the Eibishter is telling us, that even if the world is rubai cheshech, ignorance, war, rejecting the Torah, all of those in Yanim, and Yavan generally is called cheshech. Going back to the pasuk, cheshech al pnei tehom is Yavan. Remember back in Rishon. But this is the hisgabris, ha'or ala cheshech, that is still in a hidden way. Okay, so it's a hidden light. The reason why it's a hidden light is because even after the solstice, there is more light, more darkness than light. Even after the solstice, until you hit the equal around Pesach time, the equinox. But the light is beginning to be misgaber. Okay? And that's why the miracle of light happened. B'dafka now, because this is the Hiskabris or Al-Choshech. And he brings a dimion to this, because there actually is a medrash that says that when the Mishkan was built, the Mishkan was actually finished the 25th of Kislev. Now in the Torah, the Mishkan is dedicated Nisan. Nisan. The Torah says that. The Chanukkah HaMishkan was Rosh Chodesh Nisan. And yet the Medrash tells us, in reality, it was finished by Kislev, 25th of Kislev. This is the Pesikta. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu wanted to delay it until the month that Yitzchak Avinu was born. So the Maharal is explaining that the Mikdash, the Mishkan, gives light to the world. And the light is not going to be dominant till Nisan, because that's when the days and nights are equal, and then the light gets more. So the actual Mikdash had to be deferred till there's more light than darkness. But the potentiality, the beginning of the Hiskabris was B'dafka and Kislev. So in a sense, the hidden aspect of the Mishkan was Kislev. By the way, as a little aside, I just want to add something to this a little bit. Some say it's a different answer. Maharal does not give this answer, although the Lefi Devarim it would work very well. On the Beis Yosef's Kasha, why is Chanukkah 8 days? The miracle is only 7 days. So some say the reason it's 8 days is because it is celebrating Chanukkah Sabayis, the rededication of the temple. And just like Moshe Rabbeinu's Mishkan, there were 8 days of dedication. So we have 8 days of dedication. Chanukkah Sabayis, 8 days. So the kasha is this. It's true that Moshe Rabbeinu's Chanukkah Sabayis was 8 days. But Shlomo HaMelech's Chanukkah of the Beis HaMikdash was 14 days. So why did they celebrate Chanukkah Sabayis for 8 days and didn't follow Shlomo HaMelech's 14 days? The answer is Pashut. The answer is based on this Pesikta. You have a very good answer. Because in reality, the 25th of Kislev was actually the day that the Mishkan was completed and should have been dedicated. But the Eibishter delayed it to Nisan. But he promised Kislev that in the future you will be a dedicated, you will be have an opportunity to be a dedication. So it turns out that the dedication in the time of the Chashmonaim was a makeup for not having the dedication of the Mishkan. So that's why it's totally on the Mishkan. It's totally on the Mishkan. Mishkan was 8 days. We give you 8 days. Shlomo HaMelech is 14 days. That's another chesed that has nothing to do with the makeup of Hanukkah. So Chari, that's going to be Miyashiv, that particular medrash. Okay, so we finished, Baruch Hashem, we finished the first part of the Maharal's Hanukkah thing. Now the next part, I mean, next week is Hanukkah already, but we can still finish it up. The Maharal will discuss 3 interesting halachic issues about Hanukkah. I'll mention what the issues are, but in the halacha he also brings out hashkafa and musar and the like. Issue number one, which is actually very nogea l'maisa, are you yotze with wax candles, or must it be oil? Now, halacha, we paskin you are yotze. It's not min hamufcher, but you are yotze. Maharal actually took a very strict shita. He says you are not yotze even with the evet, and it's a bracha of hatala. Again, we don't paskin like that, but that was his shita. It had to be oil. The second issue he discusses is also very, very nogea. How late can you light? Now, the Gemara in Shabbos indicates that you're supposed to light basically within a half an hour after dark, because that's when the last pedestrians were in the street. But the Ramah has a psak that b'di'eved, you can light the whole night as long as, well, let me put it this way, as long as there's somebody with you who sees the candles. Meaning you have to have a pursuing nisa, but the pursuing nisa can even be somebody in your household. Now, which actually means, even like the Ramah, if you're by yourself, there might be a very much stronger hakpada to light within the half an hour. Maharal will also is very strict here. This is yet a second chumrah. He says you must light within that half an hour, and it's a bracha of atala if you do it afterwards. Again, we don't pass like that either, but we'll go over the lumdis. The third issue is, what is the order of hadlaka motzei Shabbos? Do you first make havdalah and then light, or do you light and first make havdalah? And here the Maharal comes out lahalacha. You first make havdalah and you then light, which indeed is what we do. But we have a curious distinction. You may notice in the Beis HaKnesses, Beis Medrash, Beis Knesses, we light before havdalah because we don't want people to run out. People are going to run out. In other words, if you were to make havdalah and then light, they would run out, but they'll stick around for havdalah. So in the Beis HaKnesses, we light and then make havdalah. How can you light before havdalah? The answer is because you said atah chanantanu. But when you get home, you make havdalah first. Maharal is not mechalek. He says stamazah, you always have to make havdalah first. Okay, and so those are the three halachic issues. One is wax candles. The other is how late can you light, and the third is havdalah first or hadlakas neiros. Again, we'll go over the svaras for this, and then he goes into a fascinating digression. It's hard to know exactly what the shaykhus is about the zilzal in his generation on the din of stam yenam. Stam yenam simply means wine that was made by a goy or touched by a goy that's not mavushal. So everybody knows, not allowed to drink it. Apparently, it's hard to understand this. I had to check historical books. That apparently there were many religious Jews, not non-religious, many religious Jews who just didn't hold of that prohibition. So Maharal has a few pages of great teichacha, both to the people who are Eiver and to the Rabbanim who don't give Musar. He says, how can you allow this to happen? Now you may ask me, Akasha, why does the Maharal digress to Stam Yenam in a sefer that's devoted to Chanukkah? The answer is it's really free association, because at the very end of the Ner Mitzvah, the Maharal brings a Gemara that talks about the reward for certain things, and it mentions Haragil B'ner. If you are conscientious in fulfilling Ner Shabbos and Ner Chanukah, you are zoche to have children who are Talmidei Chachamim. And he explains that. That's kind of the last thought he's going to communicate about Chanukah. Why are you zoche to banim that are Talmidei Chachamim? But as part of that Gemara, it then says, if you're ragil in making kiddush over wine, you will be zoche to the yayin of Eilam Haba, which is a spiritual yayin. So since it's part of that Gemara, he says, I'm going to talk about Stam Yayinim. Right? So it really has nothing to do with Chanukah, but it's a shaykhis to that Gemara. So next week we'll look at some of these halachic issues. Yeah.
I wonder, what's the purpose? Why does someone have to stay for a shul lighting Hanukkah and what is something like
Well, let's talk about that for a moment. Why do we light in shul anyway? Now the Emes says nobody is yaitse. Nobody is yaitse. It's very unusual, because you're only yaitse Hanukkah candles if it's lit in your home, or even if you're just staying there for a night. But halachically, it has to be your home. That's why lighting in restaurants, you're not yaitse. Chabad's lighting in parks, you're actually not yaitse. They really shouldn't make a bracha. Okay, whatever, but right? And yet, the one exception is the Ga'inim were Masaka. It's not in the Gemara. That you could be Madlik Bebeis HaKnesses and even make a bracha. It's a big chiddush. Normally, you would not be allowed to do that because that's part of Pirsume Nisa. So, Mimela, I wouldn't say you're chayav to go to shul to see the Hadlaka. But if the Ga'inim were Masakein, that this should be a greater Pirsume Nisa, so you should be mishtatif in that. It is proper to look at the candles, the base Knesses. Okay? Be well, Freilich Chanukah.